I've noticed lately on the internet, in interviews, that there are people on the right and the left doing something which, unbeknownst to them, is actually having a similar or the same effect. You see, I've noticed both people on the right who oppose reparations talking about how slavery was so far ago, so long ago, and doesn't impact today. I've also seen people on the left talk about, slavery only applying to ADOS or Americans, descendants of slavery. What people on the left don't realize is they're actually undermining the argument for reparations. Welcome to Black on the Inside. I've been noticing this argument coming up from people on the left or who are not affiliated with the right. I think that might be a more accurate description, because many people who believe in ADOS don't necessarily identify with the left, and they definitely don't, many of them definitely don't identify with the right, with conservatives, with the Republicans. But there are people who believe in ADOS, who identify as ADOS, and are using the argument. In fact, the name ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, in itself is only pointing to slavery as being the basis for reparations. That's a huge mistake. It's also, in addition to doing that, it's actually isolating African Americans, Black people in America, from the rest of the diaspora. Both of those realities lead me to believe that the ADOS movement either is not taking several things into consideration, or must be looked at closer to see what its true aims and purposes are. But let's talk about slavery. You see, people on the right intentionally, purposefully, and intentionally couch the problems of Black America in terms of slavery. Why? Because then they can point to a specific date in 1865 where they can say slavery ended. So now they can say, oh, it was over 135 years ago, 155 years ago, because it's 2021. So they can point to it and say it was so far long ago, it doesn't matter anymore. So if you are couching reparations as only being tied to slavery, you just played into their hand, hook, line, and sinker. But I'm not even talking about just being a game, manipulation. I'm talking about actual facts. Because if that was reality, if after slavery, all things being equal, all things were equal, then there would be no argument. And you would see that Black achievement would be far beyond what it is now. That's not the case. Now, if you listen to certain people on the right, they will claim that the reason why there's a achievement gap between Blacks and everyone else, especially Black Americans and everyone else, is because culture. That's a very vague term, and when you ask them to start defining it, and then taking a look at white culture and saying, wait a minute, so you're talking about sexually suggestive music. White culture has the same thing. Hispanic culture has the same thing. Every culture has, that's American culture and many other countries' cultures, where sex is a thing, where people actually adults like sex. That's an actual reality of humanity. But there are people who want to couch these arguments and pretend that they only apply to Black people. But if you're looking at it and you realize the reality of, wait a minute, it's not about culture. What actually happened from 1865 until 2021? Well, just this week, we had the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. That was where Black people actually built up a thriving society, a thriving economy, a thriving town that was Black owned, Black populated, and it had so many examples of a variety of Black people: Black excellence, Black doctors, Black lawyers, Black landlords, Black press. All of these things existed in Greenwood in Oklahoma. And then a white mob tore it down. They murdered hundreds, burned down the town, firebombed it from the air, and interned the survivors. But that's not it. You see, there are people who actually pretend that didn't happen. That's for another episode. But that's not where it ended. Because what a lot of people don't realize is Black Wall Street actually was rebuilt. Yes. Despite all of that, they actually rebuilt Black Wall Street. Do you know what ultimately killed Black Wall Street? Government did. Government, using eminent domain and public works projects, came in there, started seizing land, and built a highway directly through the town. Government intentionally killed Black Wall Street. And it wasn't the only Black Wall Street they killed. So you see, if you stop and you allow the Maafa, and if you don't know what the Maafa is, let me explain to you. Maafa is the African Holocaust. A concerted effort across various continents to destroy, subjugate, and just decimate Black people. If you take a look at the United States, North America, you take a look at the Caribbean, you take a look at Haiti, you take a look at Africa, you take a look at from Ghana to Ethiopia to South Africa. This was a coordinated, concerted effort to destroy Black people. It didn't just happen by chance. But if you understand what the Maafa is, then you won't allow yourself to be fooled by minimizing it and only talking about slavery, which officially ended in 1865. You'll talk about Jim Crow. You'll talk about the Black Codes. You'll talk about Black Wall Streets, the race massacres that occurred not just in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but all over the country. You'll talk about the government policies which were intentionally used to strip Black people of power, of land, of property, and to stunt and just completely destroy our progress. Those are things that you must consider when you're talking about the Maafa. And then you can bring it up to modern day, where you see government once again using excuses, using pretexts to cause the mass incarceration of Black Americans. If you don't know the history, if you allow the reality of the history to be minimized, you can't win the argument. But if you have the facts, if you know it, and if you realize that all of this stuff is connected, all of this stuff is part of a continuing effort to destroy Black people, that's what you're seeking reparations for. That's where the fight is. And that's where the fight is, regardless of whether reparations actually come, of stopping the war against Black people, of countering the war against Black people. Because we can't control what other people do. We can make sure they don't succeed. And yes, and it's important to realize that there are people who have the intentional purpose of minimizing what's happened to Black people. We have to be smart enough not to fall into the trap. So, ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery. Yes, if we're going to talk about reparations, we can couch certain discussions in reparations directly tied to people who are in the United States and who suffered and whose family suffered within the United States. But we have to remember the reparations discussion is not the totality of the discussion, because the Maafa was not confined to the shores of North America. Thank you for checking out this episode. As always, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.